Going to a rooftop bar slash club for my birthday has been on my bucket list for like 7 years, and I'm glad that I finally get to check that off. But it's now 2 in the morning, so I am going to go to bed and we're gonna wake up bright and early tomorrow. So right now we're at Flippers. For context, Skylar is in New York celebrating her birthday and she's staying with me the whole weekend. And I've never been here. They have Japanese souffle pancakes and I've been like wanting to try that for a really long time. I feel like it'll taste like a sponge cake. We got really lucky, there's no line, so. It's been like 2 minutes. It tastes so good. We just finished an escape room with extra time. And extra time. Yeah, but it was their fault. Yeah, exactly. Our fault was 2+ minutes. We were like exactly on time. And we even made it there. And apparently, this is one of the hardest escape rooms we have. So therefore we had giant brains. Big fat pieces. So proud of us. It's really fun. If this is what you want, is this who you are? And then I guess, oh, be a blanket. I didn't take many videos today, but I just made it back home. I almost died today. So I feel a bit more clear-headed today. I just want to walk through like some events that made me notice that this reaction was going to be a lot worse than the previous allergic reactions that I'd have. As you can see, my face is still puffy and my eyes are still a little itchy. I feel a little breathless, but I'm stable so far. So I had lunch at a Japanese and French fusion restaurant, and I thought what I had ordered would be okay. However, it seemed pretty likely that something was cross-contaminated, and I ordered a salad. And I never order salad because I'm also allergic to pollen. Even if the salad is washed, like you don't know if the pollen is still on the salad leaves, and I never really eat like raw vegetables. So when I was eating a bit of the salad, I was like, oh, my throat's a little itchy, but I ignored it. And I felt a bit nauseous after eating my dessert, but I ignored it because I had felt nauseous after a bunch of my meals for the past few weeks because I had also had COVID 3 weeks ago. I felt fine a few minutes after we ate, and about 3 hours later, I was like, you know what? I wasn't going to be able to catch my 4 o'clock bus, so I was like, okay, let me just catch the 6 o'clock, but it's going to rain at 4:30, so I'm going to leave for the subway now. It might have been a better idea for me to stay, but everything happened the way it should have happened. I walked to the subway and I felt fine for the most part. While I was walking through Times Square to get to Port Authority, I noticed that my chest felt a bit tight, and I thought like, oh, my asthma is probably just acting up because I'm walking pretty quickly and I want to get out of the rain. I crossed the street, and like right as I walked into Port Authority, my right upper eyelid started getting puffy, and I was like, oh, it's probably just my contact moving around in my eye because I've been rushing and I don't know if I've been like blinking as much as I should. And I was like, And then I noticed like 2 minutes later, like my other eye was starting to get puffy. I'm like, how are both of my contacts moving in my eyes at the same time? And I blinked and like tears came out of my eyes and they were like hot and itchy. And I was like, oh, that's not normal. So I kept walking and I got to the escalator to go up to my gate, and I was like, I feel like I'm having a hard time breathing, and then I figured like, oh, you know, my food might have been cross-contaminated, but since like it didn't actually contain anything I was allergic to, I should be fine as long as I take my hydroxyzin as soon as I get to the gate. And I was like, you know what, I'll wait until I get home to see if I'll be okay. And I said this knowing that it was going to be about 3 hours until I actually got home. And then as I was walking to the next escalator, I noticed that there were a lot of hives on the back of my neck where I usually have reactions to heat. And I was like, oh, that's not good, because that's where my airway is. And I took down my mask. I felt my mask like brush up against my mouth, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. I opened my phone's camera. I didn't take a picture, even though now I realize that I should have. And there were hives in places on my mouth where I hadn't gotten hives before. I was like, I think I might need to take more extreme measures. On the second escalator, when I was almost to my gate, I was like, okay, I'll probably need to take my EpiPen, and I'll probably need to call an ambulance. And while I was on the escalator, I realized it's my birthday weekend and I don't want to die. When I had that thought, my chest really tightened up and I was like, I might die today. And I was trying my best to keep calm. By the time I got to the escalator, I could not breathe. As I started walking towards my gate, I started coughing and I was wheezing. Fortunately, there were 2 people who were already sitting there, and there was a woman on her phone, and she noticed that my face was red and my face was puffy and I was having a hard time breathing. Even though she was on the phone, she asked me, excuse me, are you okay? And I told her, I think I'm having an allergic reaction. The other person who was at the gate, a man, he asked me if I needed water and he offered me his water bottle, but I remembered, don't take food or drink from strangers, so I said that I had my own. I asked the woman to call 911 since she had been on her phone, because my phone, for some reason, I was trying to call my mom and I was trying to call my best friend, but my phone was not putting through calls. I don't know what the issue was, but I could not call a single person that day. So as I was opening my EpiPen, I was realizing like, oh my god, this is real. So took off the cap, injected myself. The man ended up pouring water onto a towel. The 2 people, they were strangers to each other. They asked me to just lay back and sit in the chair and lay the towel on my forehead and then the back of my neck where I had a bunch of hives. I was getting very itchy around my neck, and at that point my windpipe was barely open. There was no security in sight, even though it was a Sunday. While the woman was on the phone with emergency services, they asked for the intersection of the streets, and they kept asking if I took my EpiPen, and they were like, yes, she did. Now please send an ambulance. And they hung up on her. I'm appalled, honestly. They hung up on her, and I think that's when things really started to set in, because I had just taken my EpiPen and I told them like, I don't know how long the epinephrine's going to last and I need to go to the hospital now. And eventually somebody else showed up at the gate, and while the woman and the man were helping me, this 3rd person said that he was going to go downstairs to go find help. And at that point it had been like 10-15 minutes since I took my EpiPen. And then about 5 minutes later, the paramedics showed up, thankfully, and they put me on an IV. One of the paramedics let me know that I was starting to hyperventilate and I needed to breathe slowly because my fingers were fully stiff because of the amount of oxygen I was taking in. And I have a history of anxiety attacks. I was like, yes, okay, I just need to breathe. At that point, the epinephrine had completely kicked in and I felt like I was on the onset of an anxiety attack, which wasn't going to help my windpipe. By the time they had given me all the medication, I started to stabilize a little bit, even though my face was still very puffy, and I still felt a bit itchy. They put me in a wheelchair, brought me to the ambulance, and drove me to the hospital. So the funny thing is, we decided which hospital, and my best friend got to the hospital before me. I stayed in the hospital for about 4 hours and my condition stabilized. The two strangers who helped me, Diana and Dan, I owe the two of you my life, because if you weren't there to make that call to 911 and if you weren't there to walk me through and ask me questions, then I might not be here today. I owe you guys my life, and I will forever be grateful. And to my parents and my best friend and the friends who were on the phone with me, thank you for being there in the way that you were. Also, if you are a bystander and you see someone who is red in the face or is having trouble breathing, no matter what they look like, ask if they're okay, and if you feel unsafe going up to ask them if they are okay, please find someone in charge or someone with authority to get help for them, because worst comes to worst, that person is having a medical emergency and they can't get the help they need because bystanders are afraid to speak up. I got super lucky that there were people who were willing to help, because on top of my onset of an anxiety attack and my phone not putting calls through, I don't know what would have happened if no one was there. When we were in the ambulance, the paramedic asked for my ID, and while he was reading it, he was like, "Oh my god, happy birthday." And I was like, yeah, this is a great way to end my birthday trip. All in all, this weekend was a huge adventure and I checked a lot of things off my bucket list. But this is not something I want to do again. So, how does this connect to knitting and crochet? You might have seen this in my TikTok video, but basically, I mentioned a few months ago that I have a yarn sensitivity to polyester yarns, and I just want to reiterate that having allergies is not a weakness, nor is it just a thing that children have. It just means that your immune system is incredibly strong and incredibly reactive to certain things, and that's normal. We're all built a little different, right? That said, over time, people can develop allergies because of extended exposure to certain materials or to certain proteins or chemicals, which was the case in my yarn sensitivity. So it's important to not judge people based on the materials that they decide to use, because the materials that they decide to use are the materials that are best for them. If you don't agree with their use of materials, or if you don't want to buy something because of the materials they use, there's always another option for you. The idea that someone is better than another person based off of their genetics, or because their genetics decided that they wouldn't have allergies or they wouldn't be immunocompromised, that idea is based in eugenics. No person is better than another person because of the genetics they were given. Being a good person is based off of a multitude of factors, and you cannot just root it based in race or genetics. I've talked a lot about my yarn sensitivity on TikTok, but I also do want to mention that in addition to all the allergies I have, I also have severe eczema, so my skin barrier is compromised, and from what I understand, the yarn that I was using commonly releases microplastics, and it was likely that in addition to extensive exposure over a short period of time, the microplastics were also getting underneath my skin barrier and irritating my skin, thus keeping my skin from fully recovering. Now my hands look fine. 2 years ago, my hands looked like a battlefield, just covered in blisters. I wouldn't say it's an allergy, but I definitely think it's a sensitivity. My mom was telling me a story about how a long time ago, like, latex gloves were the norm because she worked as a nurse. When people would have reactions to latex, people would just say like, oh, it's just like a one-time case. The more common reactions to latex became, then people started classifying that reaction as an allergic reaction. Originally, their reaction to a synthetic was not considered an allergy. It was just considered a rare sensitivity. So over time, as more people develop sensitivities to synthetics such as polyester, acrylic, etc., because of fast fashion and the amount of lead that is used in certain items of clothing, and because quality of clothing has been on the decline, unfortunately, my hypothesis is that more and more people are going to start developing sensitivities similar to mine, and soon there will be a category for allergies to polyester and synthetics. At that point, hopefully there are other alternatives for those of us who are allergic to both synthetics and natural fibers. But until then, more research has to be done, and I would be happy to volunteer myself to whoever is going to be able to do that research. If you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, kindly hit the like and subscribe button to join the Stitches in Our Scene, and I'll be seeing you next time.